Welcome to the Gray Havens podcast. Once again, after a long hiatus, my name is Dave Radford, part of the band The Gray Havens. And yeah, like I said, it's been a long time since our last podcast episode, and I do apologize for that. A few things happened that together sort of conspired against episodes getting made in a timely manner. First off, we had a baby boy in July named Noah. And so we took some time off for that. And after that, I was fitted by my dentist with this very awkward to wear retainer / mouth guard that I had to put on day and night up until 2 days ago. I, especially at the beginning, did not sound like myself at all. Eventually, I did learn to speak sort of normally, but it just wasn't the same when I tried recording myself. So hopefully we can get back on track here for 2022. If you're still up for hearing the stories behind our songs from our album Blue Flower. And before I get into talking about today's subject, which is our song Pale Moonlight, I wanted to announce that we are heading out on our Blue Flower tour this coming spring, beginning on March 22nd. And we're really excited about that. Excited to bring these songs to life on the stage, and tickets can be found on our website at thegrayhavensmusic.com, gray with an A. And yeah, really excited about that tour. If you're interested in a pre-show Q&A, there's also a special ticket for that if you want to get one. I'd love to answer your questions in real time in a live setting, as many as I can before the show starts, and that should be a lot of fun. So anyway, like I said, today's topic is all about our song Pale Moonlight. What was the inspiration behind the song, the spark that got it all started? All that is on the way. I will say at the beginning of the episode, this one deals a lot more with the lyrics of the song than it does with the production side. Just found that as I recorded the episode, I wanted to dive more into the lyric side of things, and I'm trying to keep most of these episodes under a half hour, and I just ran out of time. So if you're cool with that, if lyrics and meanings behind the songs are your thing, then stick around. Here we go. If you were asked to describe the sound of your favorite band, somebody says, "What's your favorite band?" You give them an answer and you said, "Oh, never heard of them before. What do they sound like?" I would be very curious to hear your answer. My guess is it would be a lot more difficult to effectively communicate what they sound like than you might first think, or not, and you're just a rock star with words and you can do it no problem. But I would certainly be in the first category of people. And early in my career as an independent band member, when I was calling everywhere I could think of to try and get gigs for us, people would ask me that question. What does your music sound like? Just describe it so I know what to expect. And to me, that was a bit like trying to describe the color blue to someone who had never seen it before, or describe the taste of chocolate to someone who had never tasted it before. It would be hard to do. So eventually, I was sort of forced out of necessity to come up with a few words to try to effectively categorize our music for people. And the reason I say I was forced to come up with words to describe our music is because I was doing a lot of cold calling, different places to try and get gigs at early in our life as a band. So I'd call these people, hey, can we play your event, or can we come and play a gig, and that whole deal. And a lot of people would ask on the other end of the phone, well, what does your music sound like? Can you describe it for me? And I've had way too many frustrating experiences trying to describe our music or the phone where I eventually just had to come up with a few words to categorize it for people. So that ended up being narrative pop folk. And when I say those three words, you might not get a clear picture of what our music is, but it'll at least probably put you in the neighborhood of where it belongs. And if nothing else, it will tell you a lot in that it probably tells you what it's not. You know, it's not going to be a classical piano vibe or jazz or heavy metal or rock and roll. So one time at our live show, if you've ever been to one of our live shows, thank you for coming. If you haven't already, you should check out our website, shameless plug, and see the dates listed for our Blue Flower Tour this spring. Anyway, one time at one of our live shows, Leisha, sort of on the spot, I think, created a subcategory of narrative pop folk, which she named Creepy Epic, which sort of stuck ever since as a bit that we do at our shows. Songs like This My Soul, High Enough, Ghost of a King, those would all fit pretty well into this category. And as I look back on old voice memos, that's what I do every so often to review ideas that I've captured and sort of sort them into different folders for visiting later on when I have time to write lyrics. When I do listen back, I'm really surprised at how many of my ideas would fit well into this category. And Pale Moonlight was certainly one of those. And I mentioned the voice memos because that's what I want to start with today. I want to start with playing you the very first iteration of the song idea that I could find. Actually, real quick, before I play the voice memo, I think it might be helpful, especially for first-time listeners, if I mention that this entire album was the end result of a massive C.S. Lewis reading binge that was kicked off by a book called Planet Narnia. And it wasn't until I had read a lot of books between Planet Narnia and Lewis's autobiography, Surprised by Joy, that I had kind of come to the conclusion that I wanted it to be about Surprised by Joy. So before I read Surprised by Joy, I was experimenting with creating sketches for the different planets, and one of them was for the moon. Michael Ward, in his book Planet Narnia, argued that the book The Silver Chair was based around lunar attributes, so attributes based on the moon. A few of those would include wetness, mist, wandering, both the physical kind of wandering as in traveling a great distance like the main characters do in that book, and wandering as in wandering of the wits, which is where we get our word lunacy. So in one of these creative sketch sessions, I guess you could call it, I was scrolling through one of my sound libraries looking for something that might call out to me as moon vibes or something. And I came across this sound called drenched dulcimer, which kind of captured my interest. And it ended up being the first sound that I wrote with on this song. And so here is that original voice memo with that drenched dulcimer sound. In the pale moonlight, I get over, I get over, I don't mind. There's a great scene in The Silver Chair, one of Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia books. Spoiler alert if you haven't read it already. The gist of the scene is the main characters, Eustace, Jill, and Puddleglum, are all on a mission sent by Aslan to rescue Prince Rilian, and they are sent to the Green Witch's realm, somewhere called Underland. And when they first arrive, there's this kind of interesting scene where they're met by these Earthmen who inform the visitors a few different times that, quote, many fall down and few return to the sunlit lands. The characters eventually find Rilian and they're able to free him, but they can't get away before the witch comes back. And when she does, she devises a plan to weave an enchantment. She throws some powder in the fire and starts thrumming a stringed instrument to try to get the characters in a mental state where they second guess reality as they know it. And their entire world becomes a question mark as the enchantment takes its effect. They question things like, you have to read the scene, but this is a very short synopsis. They question things like, did we ever really come from a place called Narnia? Were we really sent by Aslan? Is this all the world we ever really knew down here in Underland? Have we been making it all up? And so musically, that's kind of what everything was based on. That's the vibe I was trying to create musically, kind of this strummed instrument or stringed instruments being plucked and sort of a hazy, kind of murky vibe in the background. I was kind of got that idea from the powder in the fireplace, and that scene was also the basis for the lyrics, sort of questioning reality. And we'll get to all of that, but first let's start with the music bit. I'm just going to play the intro and verse 1 real quick, and then I will pause it and go back to make some comments on it. So here is the intro and verse 1.
In the pale moonlight, in the dark, in the dead of night, second hand from a star it shines, the fire's on. Cold touch of an ancient rhyme, there's a God that I left behind, second hand everywhere I find, the fire's gone.
So musically, a few things going on here, but not much actually. Obviously, we have that first intro synth that is sort of striking and haunting. We wanted to, come out with a bang on this one. And what I love about this particular synth patch that we found is that I think we found it on this song and we ended up flying it to other songs. I think it's in the chorus if it's possible, but my favorite place we used this was at the end of a song, or it's the last song on the album called Summer Meets Winter. So you got to keep in mind the album title is Blue Flower and joy is the theme of the album, but we said that the sub theme of the album is this transition. There's lots of winter summer imagery in the lyrics on the album, and very purposefully it's just kind of if the subtitle could exist, it would be When Summer Meets Winter. And winter and summer kind of symbolizing the state of the soul, moving from a more wintry, pessimistic one into full-on summer by the end of the album. And so I love that this intro synth that gets used at the beginning of Pale Moonlight gets used in the kind of party, summer, full-on anthem celebration at the end of Summer Meets Winter. It has its own sort of solo moment. Outside of that, we really just have these two elements in verse 1, the plucked pizzicato strings. Again, the inspiration for those were that scene that I read from the Silver Chair, and sort of this swarmy, murky string pad in the background. So what I'll do is I'm just going to play through that first verse in its entirety, and you can listen for those things individually, and then after I play through the verse, I'm going to dig into the verse 1 lyrics a little bit.
In the pale moonlight, in the dark, in the dead of night, second hand from a star it shines, the fire's on. Cold touch of an ancient rhyme, there's a God that I left behind, second hand everywhere I find, the fire's gone.
Okay, Let's dig into the lyrics a little bit here. In the pale moonlight, in the dark, in the dead of night, second hand from a star it shines, the fire's on. So obviously inserting some moon language here. Pale moonlight obviously is the first one. Second hand from a star it shines was a line nicked from C.S. Lewis's essay on culture and Christianity. He talks about the moon as sunlight at second hand, which I thought was cool. So I used it here. In the dark, in the dead of night was just sort of setting the scene for a kind of an escape or a getaway, going with the moon's theme of wandering. And then the fire's on was an allusion back to that silver chair scene in Prince Rilian's chamber with the witch kind of throwing that powder dust in the fire. And cold touch of an ancient rhyme is another allusion to the moon. There's a God that I left behind, the fire's gone. And there's a God that I left behind part is really the heartbeat of the song, even though it's not the chorus. Well, I guess the chorus is tied to that line in that I'm trying to get at this journey that Lewis went on. And actually, it's a journey that a lot of people are always on, but it's a phenomenon right now for a lot of people who grew up in a religious household like I did. There's a thing going on right now, sort of en masse, where people are questioning the things that they were brought up believing or to believe. And people believing the same things say that I believe, like the Bible is true, that there's a God that created the universe, that Jesus was a historical person, that was the Son of God, and all of those things are being second guessed and doubted, and deconstruction is a word that gets tossed around a lot. And that in and of itself can be a really healthy thing to do. I don't think that you're human unless you doubt and have questions like that. So there's nothing against asking questions at all.
But I think there is a sense in which you can take doubt too far and it becomes this permanent mindset. You never land anywhere. And C.S. Lewis has this quote from his book, The Abolition of Man. He's writing this as a Christian, having gone through this whole process himself, which we'll talk about in a minute. He says, quote, "You can't go on seeing through things forever. The whole point of seeing through something is to see something through it. It is good that the window should be transparent because the street or garden beyond it is opaque. How if you saw through the garden too? It is no use trying to see through first principles. If you see through everything, then everything is transparent. But a wholly transparent world is an invisible world. To see through all things is the same as not to see." End quote.
And it is sad to see people walk away, and you see the same thing in Lewis's life, actually. His journey, though, is from the exact opposite standpoint, where he, after a brief 3 years of adopting the Christian faith from ages about 10 to 13, he walks away and doubts God's existence. Actually, it's interesting in his book, he desperately wants there to not be a God that exists. But as he gets older, up until about age 30, the older he gets, the more and more uncomfortable he gets with his conclusion that God isn't real, and also that Jesus wasn't who he said he was, and he begins to doubt his doubts, if you like, or deconstruct his deconstruction up until the point where he almost admits defeat. It's interesting, you read the book, it's not this triumphant conclusion of, I finally, figured it out, and I believe that there's a God and all these things. It's almost like he describes himself actually as the most reluctant convert in all of England, as he's dragged kicking and screaming through the kingdom gates, and describes throughout the book this game of chess that he and God are playing, and he's finally in checkmate. Logically, he has nowhere else to go with integrity, and for him, God was the best explanation for, say, the creation of the universe, why we are the way we are in a lot of ways, the impulse for feeling that there's really right and wrong in the world. All of that is where Lewis landed first, and then eventually becomes a Christian after that. But the whole point is that Lewis goes through this phase of questioning whether the God that he walked away from at age 13 was the real thing or a cheap imitation or a caricature of who God really is.
They told me keep to your course and chasing after desire. I'm not finding a source like some sun gold fire, but maybe I've been so to die. I can't find the light. Tell me how many go down and never return to the sunlit lands. Heaven, please have I lost them for good?
That line that the characters in the silver chair are met with when they reach Underland, many fall down and few return to the sunlit lands. That is definitely the reference I was drawing from for that line in the chorus. And I want to make room for some questions this time around. We had some people submit some questions for the podcast that I want to answer on this episode. So we're not going to dig into verse 2 lyrics too much. Suffice it to say, if you've heard me talk about the Pilgrim's Regress, or if you've read the Pilgrim's Regress, you will not have to wonder too much about where I got the inspiration for verse 2 lyrics. Okay, at the end of the questions, I will play through the entirety of the song Pale Moonlight, but for now, this is going to be fun. Here are some listener questions, starting with Steve.
Hi Dave, I'm Steve from Morecambe in the UK. Big fan of your music, love the podcast. My question is, why do Lewis and others use the east as a symbol for paradise when in the Bible it seems to me generally east is bad? So Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden eastwards. Often you find that scorching winds come from the east, and also Israel are obviously exiled in the east. Thanks very much.
Hey, Steve, thanks so much for the question. Thanks for listening to the podcast. And I went back and looked at my notes on this for our podcast on Rhythm of the East. And I remember going on a Google search hunt for this very question when I was making the podcast, and I don't have a very satisfying answer for you. The only thing I can say is that it being a C.S. Lewis inspired album, I went with where Lewis locates paradise or Aslan's country in the Chronicles of Narnia, that being in the east. I know, unsatisfying answer, but there we are. If anybody actually does have a good answer or wants to research this, shoot me an email at thegrayhavensmusic@gmail.com, and I would love to know why Lewis chose the east as well. Okay, next question.
Hi guys, it's Kyle Marie Saraon from the Philippines. I want to thank you guys for what you do. I'm such a big fan. And I just want to ask about the visuals in this project. Like, how do you choose or design, for example, each cover art for the single release, or any details or BTS about it? And also, what visuals did you imagine or did you have in creating the music of the album? That's all, I think. And thank you so much, and God bless your family.
Thanks so much, Kyle Marie, for the question. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll take the second part of your question first. I definitely had a lot of Narnia images in mind when I was just sketching out the musical ideas in the beginning of the dreaming process for the album. And I would say that that's the main thing. For visual inspiration, the other part of your question is, we had some other questions about this, so I'll try to tackle it. We, with this album, first got the album cover. We had to get that right first. And our process for that was first, our amazing designer, Jeremy Fetzer, sent us a lot of different prototypes, and we weren't loving, they were all amazing, but we weren't feeling like we had the one in any of those early designs. And I remember watching this episode of Avatar, The Last Airbender. This is going to sound really obscure, but we were watching Avatar, my wife and I, and there's this episode called Roku Winter Solstice Part 2. If you haven't watched the show, you should. It's epic. It's amazing. But in that episode, the main character, Aang, has to go to this island where he meets Roku, one of the past Avatar people, and there's a bird's eye view of where the main character, Aang, is standing in this sort of island building, and it captured my imagination. And I pressed pause on the computer and I took a screenshot of it, and it was this, just kind of sundial-y thing, big circle, or with other smaller circles orbiting it. And I sent that to our designer and I said, what if the main part of the flower is this circle in the center, and orbiting it are these planets? And it was kind of sort of geometric in style. And he came back with basically the cover, and I just stared at it for like a half hour to an hour straight and just loved it. And as far as creating singles, everything had to be distinct yet fit in the family of what the album cover vibe was. So it had to feel distinct yet cohesive. And each one, honestly, is its own headache and struggle and puzzle to solve. There is no easy way to get at a design. I mean, obviously, first step is to find a great designer, which we had. But secondly, it's just to do a big old Shutterstock, iStock, whatever those stock photo websites are, and create these inspiration boards and just have lots of conversations. So that hopefully answers the question. All right, I'll do one or two more of these.
Hey, Dave and Leisha. This is Luke from North Dakota. Thanks so much for doing this podcast. I really enjoy learning more about the process of creating these songs. I was wondering, did you have any blue flower experiences from your childhood that helped inspire you in the creation of the songs on this album?
Hey, Luke, thank you so much for the question. Thanks for listening. I don't have anything super specific, honestly, that stands out. If I did, it would probably be what triggers something close to joy these days, which is most often nature. I'm a big sucker for the outdoors, and I had this trip or series of trips one summer after I graduated college. First one was to Venezuela, and I stayed there for 5 weeks, and it's almost every single place you turn is this beautiful, mysterious jungle mountain. We were in the Andes Mountains. We're surrounded by them, but we did go up into the mountains and canyon down the waterfalls and all that, and it was crazy. But yeah, nature stuff like that always does it, probably more than anything for me. I feel most, maybe not most, but very connected to God and kind of a huge sense of wonder, and it's all going to mean something type of emotion. And probably close behind that would be music, writing music. In every single song that I'm writing, there's usually a moment that is a kind of the mountaintop moment of the song where I feel something close to that. So those would be my two answers that I'm going to go with, even though none of them are specific to my childhood. And that is actually the last question I'm going to take. We'll put questions, hopefully scatter them on different episodes of the remaining podcast episodes. And if you do have a question, I'll leave a link in the show notes that you can use to submit your question on, and would definitely love to hear from you. So that's going to conclude today's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I'm going to finish it off by playing through the entirety of our song, Pale Moonlight.
In the pale moonlight, in the dark, in the dead of night, secondhand from a star it shines, the fire's on. Cold touch of an ancient rhyme, there's a God that I left behind, secondhand everywhere I find, the fire's gone. They told me keep to your course and chasing after desire. I'm not finding a source like some sun gold fire, but maybe I've been so did I can't find a light. Tell me how many go down and never return to this unlit lands. Heaven, please, have I lost them for good? Had a dream where I went to fight far away over seas and times, the lost shores of a distant island for so long. Woke up to the pale moonlight, cold touch of an ancient rhyme, secondhand everywhere I find it, the first one. They told me keep to your course and chasing after desire. I'm not finding a source like some sun gold fire, but maybe I